All right, so welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a good lunch. Super excited to be welcoming Mike Smith from ReLeaf Chatham-Kent for our next presentation. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction and welcome Mike, and then I'll pass it over to you. But I just wanted to remind our attendees that there is 0.75 ISA CEU credit available for this session, so I'll be showing the code at the end and how to get that. So welcome, Mike. Mike Smith is a dedicated environmentalist and the founder of ReLeaf Chatham-Kent, an organization that is dedicated to preserving natural habitat and promotion of important. Sorry, I dropped my mic. Okay, I'm going to restart. Mike Smith is a dedicated environmentalist and the founder of ReLeaf Chatham-Kent, an organization that is dedicated to preserving natural habitat and promoting the importance of native plant gardening in their community. Mike is also the current president of the Sydenham Field Naturalists and brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to his work with an Associate Diploma in Environmental Management from the University of Guelph and another in Multimedia Design from Humber College. As an engineering technologist, he specializes in GIS, cartography, and spatial analysis, and is an avid native plant gardener, hiker, birdwatcher, and lover of trees. So Mike leads ReLeaf Chatham-Kent with a focus on raising awareness about the importance of protecting natural resources and advocating for their preservation. With a strong commitment to education, community, and advocacy, Mike is a driving force in the efforts to protect and promote the natural environment in his community. ReLeaf Chatham-Kent's work in promoting forest cover in Chatham-Kent was recognized with an award from Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority in 2021 for their community engagement. With his diverse background in environmental management, multimedia design, and engineering, Mike brings a unique skill set to his work and is dedicated to making a positive impact on the world around him. So thank you so much for being here today, Mike. We're really looking forward to your presentation. So I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Rachel and the entire team at Reforest London for graciously inviting me to join you today. Your dedication to the cause of urban forestry and environmental stewardship is truly inspiring, and it's an honor to be here among fellow advocates and changemakers. So welcome to Cultivating Community, the evolution of ReLeaf Chatham-Kent. Today, we're going to embark on a journey through the growth and development of organization, highlighting the power of community engagement and collaboration in fostering positive change. I personally love a presentation that starts with a good quote, and this is one of my favorites from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote on the interconnectedness of humanity and nature. The creation of 1,000 forests is in one acorn. These simple yet profound words encapsulate the essence of our journey today. They remind us that monumental change often begins with humble beginnings, and that every small action has the potential to spark a ripple effect of transformation. With each tree planted, each community member engaged, we sow the seeds of change that will flourish and multiply, enriching our environment, our communities, and our collective future. So with that, I will dig into the story of ReLeaf Chatham-Kent. Starts back in June of 2019. I was living in Chatham in a small house with a tiny little yard, but I had some stormwater management issues. So I signed up for a workshop hosted by the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority called Greening Your Grounds. Some of you may be familiar with this. It was created to help homeowners make the most of rainwater, basically. LTVCA partnered with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, who developed a fantastic guide covering easy to implement stormwater management projects. And honestly, when I walked in to that event, I had no idea that would basically totally change the course of my life. So to complement the rest of the material that was being presented, LTVCA invited Larry Cornelis, the president of the Sydenham Field Naturalists, to speak on the importance of native plants. And I guess if you're attending this conference, I don't imagine I need to go into great detail on this, but Larry's presentation basically cured my plant blindness. So he talked about the differences between native and non-native plants and highlighted that it was actually trees like Quercus and Prunus species that provide the backbone for biodiversity. So while I had always loved both gardening and being out in nature, the knowledge that native plants did so much more to support biodiversity than my grandma's rose bushes was a total revelation for me. So I went home. I think the presentation was on a Friday. So I went home and I spent the rest of that weekend basically ripping out all the non-native plants in my yard. I got rid of forsythia and all kinds of other nasty stuff, Rosa Sharon. Started hacking away immediately. That same week, we're in June 2019 still, I was doing some family history research with my dad, and I came across the story of my great-great-great-great-grandfather, David Smith, who arrived in what's now Chatham-Kent with his two sons in the mid-1800s. And after they landed along the western shore of Lake Erie, they ventured about 3 days inland, where they were each granted 100 acres for each man over 21. And if you're familiar with Chatham-Kent, their homesteads were established just east of what is now the hamlet of Merlin in Tilbury East Township. And after clearing the land for their homes and farms, the Smiths built one of the first sawmills in the area. In the past, so 200 years ago, when the Smiths were first getting here, Chatham-Kent boasted significant forest cover. Approximately 33% of its land area was covered by ancient forests. The trees were so dense that travel by river was the preferred mode of transportation for many years. Early accounts of the forests of Chatham-Kent speak about how it was like entering a densely shaded cathedral. I'm sure you can probably imagine what that was like. I certainly have a number of times. These lush woodlands provided critical habitat for a diverse range of plant and animal species, and they would have contained towering examples of American chestnut, chinkapin oak, butternut, and many more, most of which are absent or increasingly rare in our remaining forests. Speaking of remaining forests, today, Chatham-Kent has the lowest forest cover in the province. We are sitting at under 3.5%, and directly tied to that, we also have the worst air quality in the province, so due to the particulate matter. Being one of Ontario's most productive agricultural areas, diminishing natural cover has, well, it's long been a concern. But now I had knowledge of just how important native plants and trees were to the environment in general, as well as a direct tie back to some of the first people in this area to make a living from clearing those ancient forests off of the land. So within a couple of weeks of that workshop and Larry's presentation, I had pretty much replaced all of the non-native plants in the gardens. I picked up a bunch of trees and shrubs from a great little nursery called Heavenly Earth near Bothwell. One of my favorites is actually a sassafras. I still actually miss that tree. And I also put in a wide mix of other native plants from the fantastic greenhouse at Amgenong First Nation near Sarnia. Again, I probably don't need to explain this to this group, but basically overnight, I had butterflies popping up on the helianthus that I planted, and I was out pretty much every day after work taking pictures, trying to ID all the various sweat bees, moths, other pollinators that were all over the place. Needless to say, I was hooked. There was one problem though. I was already out of space. Within that 2 weeks, I had pretty much gone buck wild and filled up every square inch of garden space with native plants. The whole property was less than 1/10 of an acre, and I was getting more interested in the real powerhouse of biodiversity for Southwestern Ontario, oak trees. I had decided that I wanted to put back some of the trees that my ancestors had helped take down. So, thanks to a very patient wife and a really great real estate agent, we moved. By September 2019, we had found a great 1.5 acre lot in North Buxton, which is about 10 minutes south of Chatham. And it's only about 10 kilometers as the crow flies from where the original Smith homesteads were in the 1800s. With the exception of 3 large silver maples in the front yard, which you can see in this picture here, the property was pretty much a blank slate. There'd be a few non-natives to take care of, like the hedge of Rosa Sharon along the driveway. But I was thrilled to find something so well suited to what I wanted to achieve, which was a restored acre of Carolinian forest. The neighbor directly adjacent and to the south of me had an intact 1 acre woodlot that would be a great source of seed as well. It's mostly silver maple, but it has some nice remaining ash trees, a fantastic pin oak, and a handful of shagbark hickory. So only took me about 3 months to move, but once we closed on the house, I realized that I wanted to document the process of rewilding the parcel. Getting rid of all of this lawn and grass was going to be massively satisfying for me, and I really wanted to be able to share my progress. So just like that, ReLeaf Chatham-Kent was born. I started with a Facebook group and an associated Instagram account, and I got posting. I really wanted to share what I had learned from Larry about how important individual actions can be. So I think I had LTVCA out within 2 or 3 days of closing on the house, just to get a sense of what I was going to be able to do. I explained that I wanted to plant a whole bunch of trees. And in the spring of 2020, I worked with LTVCA to get a Forest Ontario grant for over 1,000 trees, which I hand planted at random all over the parcel. There's me planting the trees. The species mix I chose was fairly diverse, but I planted a large number of swamp white oak because the parcel is fairly wet, especially through the spring and the early summer. I dug a bunch of pit and mound features. I cleared out some invasive plants like honeysuckle and multiflora rose. And I started getting excited about the idea of growing my small little forest. So despite being founded right as COVID was becoming a massive part of everybody's life, ReLeaf Chatham-Kent grew really quickly. So within a few months, there were hundreds of members, and the Facebook group was always active with questions. Maybe it was the fact that we were all confined to our houses, that people took a keen interest in the outdoors, but for whatever reason, the group was flourishing almost immediately. So mostly we focused on being a welcoming place for new native plant gardeners to come and learn. I added a couple of moderators to keep up with all the questions, and I tried to post regularly. We had contests, we had book reviews, we had shared garden plans. I let people know about local native plant sales that were coming up, and really tried to make it a hub for people to make connections and build community around taking better care of our landscape. The group also began to make a tangible impact. So in the summer of 2020, so the first summer, as the trees were growing up, I was noticing all kinds of new native plants popping up. Now, fortunately, I also received a long grass and weeds bylaw violation notification. One of my neighbors had concerns about the naturalization that was happening and wanted me to mow around 1,000 trees. I had been diligently applying mulch about 3 feet out from each tree to make sure that they were well taken care of. And I was really pleased with the frost aster that came up once I stopped cutting the grass. You can see that all here in this picture. It actually is really quite amazing. Mowing was really not only going to be extremely time consuming. Basically, I only have a push mower. I didn't even bother to buy a riding lawnmower. So cutting an acre and a half, I'd basically be out there constantly trying to mow around 1,000 trees. So, but not only that, it was also going to set back my progress. I really wanted to keep these things like the frost aster and all that stuff. So after doing a bit of research, I found that most other municipalities have a clause in their long grass bylaws that allows for naturalization. So I reached out to my counselor and I worked with him to get a revised bylaw before Chatham-Kent Council. It took about a year, but it was approved in June 2021, and the new Chatham-Kent bylaw includes a clause that provides an exception to the bylaw when native species are intentionally planted and they are also naturally reproducing. So in my case, obviously I had planted lots of native species, but things like the frost aster, and I also had some gray dogwood coming up on their own. That allowed me to meet those 2 criteria, and I was granted an exception. I believe without the support of ReLeaf members writing deputations and writing their own counselors and support, I wouldn't have been successful in getting this change approved. And obviously it doesn't just apply to me. Anybody in Chatham-Kent can now apply for a naturalization exemption. When you apply, there's a public works inspector that comes and inspects the property and basically checks for those 2 criteria. You've planted native species and you have native species that are naturally reproducing. And then away you go. You get your name on a list and nobody can call about your long grass. So as the group grew, we started to branch out into other types of events as well. In the fall of 2021, we had our first tree cycle event. And if you're familiar with Reforest London's events, this is exactly the same. We encouraged our ReLeaf members to pot up trees that would have otherwise been mowed or pulled from an inconvenient spot in a garden and deliver them to a depot. Anyone who dropped off a tree was welcome to take one home as well. So we had people bringing in silver maples or cedars and going home with bur oaks or redbuds. The event was an immediate hit. I think we had over 50 people come through on the first day. Any trees that were left over at the depot at the end of the weekend, we worked with the Lower Thames Conservation Authority to plant in one of their tree planting projects. And in total, our tree cycle events have donated over 250 trees to LTVCA projects and distributed tons more to members within our group. And that's still something that we do every year in the fall. After taking the Forest Gene Conservation Association's seed collector certification, give a quick shout out here to great instructors, Kristen Sandball and Melissa Spearing. I think Kristen's presenting tomorrow. Seed collecting is another aspect that I've really tried to actively encourage within the membership of ReLeaf. So while we don't have a ton of intact forests left, we do have a number of large ancient trees. If you've ever been to Chatham, I encourage you to visit Tecumseh Park. There are 3 200-plus-year-old Shumard oaks in the park. We have a really beautiful heritage elm tree on Queen Street. So collecting, stratifying, propagating, and distributing special trees is another way that the group has come together. 2021 was also ReLeaf's first native garden tour. So we split it over 2 days because we actually had 15 stops. And we had an incredible turnout for that first event. We raised over $1,000 for Sydenham Field Naturalists and both of our local conservation authorities. And that's something that we have also continued to do every year. There was a 2022 and 2023 version of the garden tour as well. Anticipating that it'll continue again. We might even have one this spring and then another one towards the end of the summer. Garden tours have continued to be a popular event for the group. And one of the most popular stops is always at Rick Gray's residential property in Ridgetown. I actually first met Rick when he taught the GIS course I took as part of my environmental management program at the University of Guelph. Rick's been an avid native plant gardener for literally decades. So we're always lucky that he makes his gardens available as a tour stop. I've never seen any place like this, but Rick actually has over 325 species of native plants on his property. And again, you can see from the picture here, this is just like a residential backyard. So because of his experience and everything, Rick is one of the foremost experts on native plants in the country. So much so, in fact, that he recently wrote a book. The Gardener's Guide to Native Plants of the Southern Great Lakes region just came out last month, end of February. And it's actually, I just checked this morning, it is currently number 4 on the Globe and Mail's top selling nonfiction books in the country. So we are really honored and happy to have Rick be basically one of the group experts. He's very active in the ReLeaf group and always willing to share his knowledge. So ReLeaf grew and has grown fairly organically, but tree tagging has actually become one of my favorite ways to promote the group. I generally wait for a day when the forecast doesn't call for too much rain, and then I'll head out to a local park or even just on sidewalks around town, and I try to introduce people to the trees they're sharing space with. One of the most heartwarming messages I've received was from a young mom who noticed a tree tagging while she was out walking her kids along Mud Creek. She was so excited and she joined the group, and she's been an active member. She brings her kids to tree planting and invasive species removal events all the time, and it's been one of the ways that the group has grown that I'm really excited about. Another spin-off project that I'm extremely proud to have been a part of is the Prairie Project. So spearheaded by one of our ReLeaf members, Becky Haskell-Thomas, the Prairie Project took an acre of turf grass in a park on the south side of Chatham and turned it into an excellent example of tall grass habitat. So working with Lower Thames and our Parks Department in Chatham, Becky arranged the funding. She helped prepare the site. She participated in the planning. She performs regular maintenance, which is usually just removing calorie pear out of the middle of things. And she also maintains an active social media presence for the project. And this should be a picture of me with some kids, so I apologize, but education has also been a big piece of the puzzle. So being able to reach the younger generations is really important. They're keen to learn, but I've found opportunities and resources to be lacking. And I've been lucky to present lessons to homeschool groups, college classes, community groups, scout troops. And I found everybody to be really engaged and eager to learn. And the photo is actually supposed to be of one of the group of students that I worked with learned about collecting and stratifying red oak acorns. And I just checked in last week, and it sounds like most of the students have successfully germinated their trees in the fridge over the winter here, and they plan to plant them in their schoolyard as part of their graduation, which is an incredible legacy for me to play a small part in. Back to the photos. 2022 was a really exciting year for me personally. While I was just out for coffee one day, I got a call from the nominating committee for the Sydenham Field Naturalists asking if I would be interested in taking over as president of the club. It took me back, and it was a huge and frankly unexpected honor. I mean, I was just a dude who liked planting trees. But for me, it also represented an opportunity to learn from the man who inspired me so much in the first place. Larry Cornelis has forever, basically, been a driving force for Sydenham Field Naturalists, and he was going to be staying on as past president, so I was quick to accept the offer. SFN has existed for almost 40 years and has a reputation of Chatham-Kent's only nature club. Being tasked with leading and growing this organization felt a bit intimidating for me. I felt out of my depth, but with patient guidance of Larry and the other SFN directors, I've settled into my role, and I'm just starting my second term as president for 2024 to 26. Getting involved with SFN allowed me to make a wide range of new connections. We were responsible for stewardship at a couple of municipally owned properties, Pawpaw Woods and Sycamore Woods, as well as at Ontario Nature's Sydenham River Nature Reserve. If you're not familiar with it, this spectacular 288-acre property forever protects one of Ontario's most biodiverse waterways. Back in 2014, Lambton Wildlife and Sydenham Field Naturalists alerted Ontario Nature about a special property on the mussel-rich Sydenham River that was up for sale. And after some initial discussions and exploring the property, Ontario Nature signed an agreement to purchase it. The creation of the Sydenham River Nature Reserve was officially announced on December 19th, 2016. Many individuals and organizations gave generously in support of this effort. Lambton Wildlife and Sydenham Field Naturalists were instrumental in the fundraising, and we now share the responsibility as stewards of the property with Ontario Nature. One of SFN's most recent achievements is obtaining a Chatham-Kent Community Foundation grant to plant 2 Miyawaki forest projects in parks in urban Chatham. The Miyawaki forest planting method, if you're not familiar, was developed by Japanese botanist Akira Miyawaki, and it's a technique for creating dense native forests in small urban spaces. Unlike traditional reforestation methods, which often involve planting a number of tree species in rows, the Miyawaki method, it emphasizes biodiversity and rapid growth. It involves planting a diverse mix of native plant species in a closely spaced manner, typically 3 to 5 trees per square meter, typically in multiple layers, canopy, subcanopy, to mimic the structure of a natural forest. By closely mimicking these conditions of natural forests, including soil composition and microclimate, Miyawaki forests can grow up to 10 times faster and become self-sustaining ecosystems within just a few years. The method is renowned for its ability to restore degraded lands, enhance biodiversity, and mitigate the effects of climate change by sequestering carbon dioxide. Our plantings are scheduled to take place just about a month in early May, and each of the projects is going to be 200 square meters and will contain 600 trees and shrubs each. Another project that I'm really personally excited about is our community nursery efforts. Chatham-Kent's a mostly rural municipality, but we have quite literally dozens of small towns and hamlets and other little communities. And for the most part, each of them has their own character, and most have their own horticultural societies, BIAs, and other community groups. So working with those stakeholders, we're going to establish small community tree nurseries to grow street trees that will be planted right in these community spaces. So for example, maybe the Ridgetown Hort Society has identified that they'd like to see more hickory trees in parks and along their streets. We'll work with that group to collect the seeds, stratify them, pot them up, grow them, care for them, and eventually plant out the species of trees that they want to see in their community. I personally believe this helps out the municipality because obviously growing trees is cheaper than buying them. It helps the community groups be more active and play a role in how their natural spaces will look in the future. And of course, it also preserves the local genetics of our tree species. So win-win-win there on that. Being able to link SFN and ReLeaf together has provided even more reach, and it's a benefit for both groups. SFN has really been able to draw on the larger volunteer base that ReLeaf enjoys in order to facilitate some of our stewardship projects. And ReLeaf members have been able to tap into the vast network of connections and knowledge that SFN enjoys amongst our members. As of this morning, membership in the ReLeaf Facebook group sits at 1,496 members, and the Instagram account has 1,425 followers. Both accounts are extremely active and are usually filled with great conversation and people willing to share their experiences with new members. And honestly, if you had told me back in 2019 that ReLeaf would have almost 1,500 members and I would be the president of the Sydenham Field Naturalists, I think I would have been totally floored. And sitting here today being asked to present on the amazing growth of this group by Reforest London, which was an organization that I wanted to emulate when I started this all, it feels quite surreal to me. I'm really beyond proud of the collective efforts of ReLeaf Chatham-Kent and the Sydenham Field Naturalists. And if I could leave you with one thought this afternoon, it's this. Don't dismiss the importance of a single connection. Had I not gone to that workshop and met Larry, I believe none of this would have happened. I personally believe that community engagement is of utmost importance as it bridges the sometimes widening gap between residents, municipalities, and academics. People really are interested in caring for nature. They just often need a little knowledge, support, and encouragement. Once they know better, they do better. I would like to thank everybody for your time today, and I'd be very happy to take any questions if you have them. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. I've seen in the chat a lot of congratulatory messages. Well done on getting the bylaw amendment. And just comments as to the amount of work that you put into building this as a movement and as such an important aspect of your community. So I don't know if we have any questions coming in. Oh, we just have one from Sean. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for your presentation. You mentioned going out for tree tagging. Would you be able to explain more about what that entails?
Sure. So it's really actually it's quite fun and simple, really. I get some sidewalk chalk. I go to a park, usually a park that has a trail. I look for a trail. We have quite a large park in Chatham that has an asphalt path that runs through it. And I'll just walk along the path and identify the trees that are next to the path. So I literally write like, hey, we're silver maples. And I draw some arrows pointing to the silver maples. And I usually put the Instagram handle for ReLeaf at the bottom. And I kind of just do it all over town. Like I do it in parks, I'll do it in sidewalks. Like I've just gone into residential neighborhoods and be like, hey, there's a tulip tree. And I just write, I'm a tulip tree on the sidewalk. And it's just kind of fun and lighthearted. And I think for me, when I started this, I'd always been big into nature, but like I think like most people, like a tree is a tree is a tree, right? So this is just one little way that I kind of like to help
That's great. Yeah, I
people's
think
plant bindness a little. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I think that's something, as I've learned more about trees and, I think how I used to be is walking down the street and, see tree after tree after tree and not really, get any closer, get any more personal with what the species is and stuff like that. So I can imagine that that's a really important thing in the community for people who don't know much about, about the really unique species that we have in this Carolinian zone. So I think it's really cool and informal, but also like it gets people talking and it's a really interesting educational component. I have a question here about the Miyawaki forests. We also have been working to plant a couple of these across London. Do you see maintenance in the future as some trees outcompete others or just watch for potential hazards?
Yeah, so this is something, to my understanding anyway, in North America that hasn't been undertaken for all that long. So there aren't very many examples of mature Miyawaki forests that you can go and have a look at that have been going for 10, 15 years kind of. So I think that's kind of sort of a wait and see. Our plan, certainly in the initial establishment, is to be doing a lot of maintenance. If there's weeding or anything that needs to be done, we're going to be on top of that quickly. But my plan would be hopefully that these would be sort of self-sustaining little pocket forests, and things like blowovers or branches falling are not going to be so much of a concern. We're just kind of going to let it happen. Of course, there's safety aspects to consider too, because they are going to be in parks. but fingers crossed that we're not going to run into too much of that. But I think it's sort of a wait and see here still.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that's kind of where where we're coming from it as well. We have planted two, but they haven't been in places that see a lot of traffic. One is at, the kind of the corner edge of a cemetery where they're trying to, build canopy coverage and not necessarily, it's not necessarily like people walking past. But yeah, definitely things to consider as they grow and as they develop. I think, especially as it's a new thing for us specifically and something that you're testing out.
Sure. I think
I
it's
have
a
a
lot
question.
more popular in like tropical areas like India and Southeast Asia and things. They're a lot more we've been doing it for a lot longer. So
Mm. I have a question from Brendan Samuels. Do you think that the word naturalization can be misleading? Even when people plant native species to recreate habitat and pre-colonial landscape conditions in the urban environment, this isn't quite the same thing as natural. I'm wondering if there are other words we could be using to encourage people to create habitats for biodiversity or other benefits without conflating restoration efforts with undisturbed landscapes.
yeah, that's really great. Um, I've thought about that. I've thought about that a lot too. And one of the other terms I like to use is rewilding. So, you're not, the aim isn't obviously to restore exactly what we had 200 years ago. It's not possible, right? So, um, it's more about just making it more effective, biodiverse than it is now, right? It's not about getting to a perfect state. It's about getting to better than lawn. So, um, I think even small incremental, it doesn't have to be, you say rewilding, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a scorched earth, get rid of all your lawn and plant 1,000 trees like I'm doing. It can literally be little pieces here and there, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Someone's asking about the progress on the naturalization project on your property. How is that looking? And do you have any updates for us?
so yeah, thankfully after 2021 and the changes to the bylaw, I didn't have to mow my lawn anymore. And that actually hasn't made a really big difference. I mentioned in one of the slides that adjacent neighbor has a fully forested acre. So I've got probably half of my backyard is gray dogwood shrubs now that have just sort of seeded themselves. I'm still out maintaining the trees. I've planted probably in the 4 years since 2020, I think I've probably planted another 500.
Wow.
I wasn't about to put cages around 1,000 trees for rabbits, so I kind of was leaving things to leaving nature to itself that way. And I have had a lot of rabbits come through and snip things off. So um, over the last few years, I typically plant about 100 trees, 150 trees a year just to keep up with the bunnies.
Mhm.
I am outside of town, and I have just this past year seen some deer browsing as well, which is going to set me back a bit. But that wasn't something that there weren't deer 4 years ago that I had seen. And as far as tracking progress, I'm quite an avid bird watcher, and that was one of the things that I was actually really excited about was being able to basically turn my yard into a big bird feeder. So the spring of 2020, um, during the peak of spring warbler migration, I did a walk around the yard and I got 23 species. So that was before the trees were planted, basically, or they had just been planted. And then just this past May, I did another walk, same path, basically through the yard, about same timing, 15, 20 minutes in the yard. And I got 54 species, birds
Yeah.
in the yard. So essentially, I've doubled the bird biodiversity in 4 years. So things like that are kind of ways that I've been monitoring and keeping track of how things are going.
Great, great. Yeah, I think that kind of perfectly answered my next question as well. Someone was asking what are the most interesting birds or animals that you've seen, kind of re um like
Yeah.
moving back into these spaces.
So I'm out there a lot. I'm out there in the yard all the time.
Mhm.
And it was just this past May, I was out there, I heard a bird calling that I wasn't necessarily familiar with. So I don't know if anybody has the BirdNet app on their phone, but it's literally like you can record the bird calling, and just like iNaturalist, it gives you a few suggestions of what it thinks it might be. So I got whipped my phone out, recorded this bird call, and the first thing that popped up was cerulean warbler, and I thought, there's no way. Like I've seen cerulean, I've again been bird watching most of my life, and I've seen cerulean warblers a handful of times, and it was always way up in the canopy at Point Pelee or at Skunk's Misery. It was never in a park I never in a yard either. But ran back in the house, grabbed my binoculars. Sure enough, top of one of those silver maples, cerulean warbler. So, and as far as, yeah, like I've had all kinds of, like, if you can name a warbler species, especially, it's essentially been through the yard. I had a hooded warbler. It's been pretty incredible to see um, just how quickly it happened, right? Like if plant it and they'll come. That's what I like to say. So if it's not there,
Mhm.
they're not going to be there, right? So
Yeah. Someone's asking just if you could repeat the name of the bird call app.
yeah, bird net. So bird
BirdNet.
net. Yeah, and it's really simple to use. As soon as you open it, it starts recording, and then you hit submit, and it gives you a list of suggestions of what it thinks the birds might be that are calling in your recording.
Yeah, I've used Merlin before, but I haven't I don't have any experience with BirdNet either. So thanks for sharing that.
No problem.
To go back a little bit more to your work with trees and relief, how do you deal with maintenance and planting projects for watering and weeding, for example? Do you use volunteers? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we do typically use volunteers for all that stuff, but we also have quite good relationship with our parks department. Um, Chatham-Kent has a lot of grass in parks, as I think most places do. And it's a major expense every year for the municipality. Um, and as long as it's done intentionally and typically with some signage, the municipality is really encouraging of tree planting and naturalization projects in parks. So we've also been fortunate that the Parks Department is willing to help out in that regard as well. So in some cases, our volunteers will plant the trees and put up the um, stake them and things like that, put the mulch in. But then our park summer students will just add that to their list of things to water and come around with the water truck and take care of the watering for us. We've also tried to situate some of our planting projects next to municipal drains in parks. So it makes it easy to just throw a quick like gas powered pump in to water things as well. So, but thankfully, we actually haven't had too many issues with droughts or anything like that. So we haven't had to do too much supplemental watering, thankfully.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Um, there's a couple more questions popping up in the Q&A. I think we have a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Um, someone is asking, they say, I'm new to Canada and not familiar with trees in Canada, but keen to learn about them and participate in tree planting and volunteer activities. What would be the best way to start this or to get involved?
I guess depending on, I mean, you're more than welcome to join the ReLeaf group, of course. It's it's quite focused on Chatham-Kent. So for that reason, I would say if there's, depending on where you're located, I would seek out a community group or a nature club. Most places have a field naturalist organization. A lot of the field naturalist organizations have actually changed their names over the past few years. I think a lot of people, if you say field naturalist, they don't necessarily even know what you're talking about. So that kind of limits the scope right away. Um, so some of the other groups that I know that used to be field naturalists that have changed their names are Lambton Wildlife, Nature Guelph, Nature London. All those places used to be field naturalist organizations that are now just sort of more general nature community groups. And I think that would be the place that I would start. Um, Not only because they're often keen to educate, but because they're usually full of people like yourselves that are relatively new to this. Um, and the backbone of all those organizations are certainly for SFN is our longstanding members like Larry, who are just like a wealth of knowledge and are more than happy to share. So that would be, I think my suggestion would be to just do a little bit of research and then go to a meeting and put yourself out there.
Definitely. Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, we at Reforest London have a lot of volunteer opportunities as well, but that's where a lot of the important work is happening. And we couldn't do a lot of the work without some of those volunteers. So there's always opportunities to get involved. Speaking of nonprofit groups, this comment here says, I've had conversations with people in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C., both very active groups tree planting at no cost to residents. Regarding the balance of nonprofit groups taking a more active role in tree planting and rewilding, and you even have included nursery, do you see this model as sustainable long-term, or is the shift away from paid landscaper and tree installers an actual loss?
It's a great question. I really do see the benefits of this sort of smaller, like grassroots community stuff. Specific to the Ridgetown example that I gave, the Ridgetown Horse Society is quite an active horticultural society. They do have a lot of older members, and I presented at a meeting, and almost all the conversation afterwards with these older members was about what Ridgetown used to look like when there were more trees. And it's really tied to their sense of place. Like it's really like the actual tree species that used to be there are really tied in their memory to their hometown. And I think that's a really important consideration. Like I think just in general with like globalization, everything looks like a strip mall, right? And the native plants that are native to a specific place are really what provides that sense of making things different from one place to another. So to my mind, yeah, the community grassroots nature of being able to have a say in what's planted in your front yard and when you take a picture of your house, what does it look like? Does it have a Norway maple? Does it have red buds? Does it have like, to me, that has a lot of value. And I think that's just going to keep increasing. The sort of blanket, like, big landscaping companies with non-native trees, I would hope that that's sort of going by the wayside.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we're nearing the end of our time. But I wanted to thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your work with us. I think I just have one final closing question for you, and that is, what has been the most rewarding part of the work you've done in building ReLeaf Chatham-Kent or with the Sydenham Field Naturalists?
It's 100% the connections that I've made.
Mm.
I used to be, I don't think apathetic is the right word, but I certainly wasn't engaged in kind of what was going on around me. And this has really shifted that in such a big way. I'm always busy. It's doing stuff that I love. So I think that would be the biggest thing, is the connections with people.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Mike.
So,
We look forward to, connecting and working more together in this region of Southwestern Ontario. So
awesome.
we appreciate your presentation, and yeah, we'll let you go. Thanks so much for all
Amazing.
your answers as well.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.